Hello, and welcome to the Watershed Moments podcast, where I and other therapists discuss real life, everyday mental health issues to give you real and practical help to live a healthier life for yourself and with others. Now, if you want more content like this, be sure to visit our website at watershedinitiative.com to dig into the library of podcasts, articles, and courses that we've made just for you. And of course, if you need face-to-face help, definitely reach out to our partner affiliate, Lifeology of Richardson and Frisco at 214-556-0996 to get connected with a therapist or life coach. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy the show. All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to the Watershed Moments podcast. I'm your host, Lee Tran, and I've got our therapist back here joining us here today, Laura Harrison.
Hello.
And Adrian Jones.
Hey, hello everyone.
Hey, it's really good to have you guys back. And we are continuing on in our series on conflict. We've been unpacking a number of different things around conflict concepts and so forth. We are finally getting into an area of this series where we're going to dig into common and specific areas of conflict and how to navigate these common areas and how to resolve conflicts. And so a lot of what we've been talking through has been building up to this point. And so I'll start with the observation to kind of frame this discussion a little bit and just saying that many of the conflicts that I see that come up in interpersonal relationships, like within family and marriages, typically stem from two different areas. And first, that's going to be in the areas where there are misalignments, where there are differences in how people navigate boundaries and expectations. And so a lot of conflicts can come out of this place where we're just not on the same page about different things, right? And I'd like to be able to talk through like what those different areas could be and how we handle them. The other area is going to be how we handle hurt feelings and old wounds and current wounds in relationships. And so how we talk through resolving and getting healing around those areas, that's another major area. So those two areas we'll unpack in the next few different episodes of our podcast. But this one today, we're going to specifically focus on those alignment issues when we're not on the same page with the person we're having a fight with, and we need to get on the same page. And if we don't, we're going to continue to have fights about it. So I thought in order to do this, that we would look through and we would watch together another video clip of a fight that's going to happen between, in this situation, a husband and wife. And so just specifically for our listeners out there, to give you a spoiler alert, this is going to be a clip from the TV series This Is Us. And Laura, you mentioned this is season 3, right? Yes. So if you, spoiler alert, if you haven't watched season 3 yet and you want to watch that first before, like we're going to get into some of the conflict and we're not going to unpack everything, obviously, but there is going to be some of that we're going to talk about here today. So I thought this would be a great kind of teaser for our listeners just to be able to frame, one, how conflicts can get messy really fast, but then two, in this particular clip, we'll see how misalignments come up and why they can drive conflicts so hard and so fast. So are you guys cool with just kind of watching this with me and unpacking it with me?
Awesome. Let's do it.
Okay. All right. So
I'm completely caught up on This Is Us.
Okay. All right. Good. All right. So Adrian mentioned earlier, this is an intense TV series. And so for those of you a fan of heart, this is a pretty real conflict. And so we're going to get into it and don't worry, our listeners will be here to unpack it with you and recover from the conflict together. Okay. So let's go ahead and listen.
I am tired of having this fight. We have been having the same fight ever since we met. I don't want to be swallowed up by you and then you sweet talk me and do whatever the hell you want. You have turned me into your mother.
Hey, don't bring my mother into this.
Well, she's already in it. You don't even realize it, but they're both in it. Admit that you think that your job is more important than mine.
That's absurd.
Admit it.
Admit to me that you hated the fact that I had something happening for myself.
I hated that you lied about working with your ex-boyfriend.
Come on, Randall, admit it.
No. I will not be bullied into saying something even more awful to you. I will not speak that way to you. I won't do it.
Career? You are a 40-year-old woman seeing covers in pubs. That is not a career, Rebecca.
We made a promise to one another that we would never get lost in each other, and I broke that promise. And you let me. You have let me bend to your every need time and time again. Oh, we have kids? I have to step back from my job. You quit your job? I work overtime. You have a dream of buying your father's building. It becomes my dream too. You run for city councilman, I stand by your side. You win city councilman. Now what? I'm supposed to give up what I love to become a politician's wife? How many dinners am I supposed to go to, Randall? And how long? And what if city council isn't enough? What then?
That's not what I
No,
want.
I finally have something. I have something that I have been looking for longer than I knew. And I am not going to give that up. I am not going to bend. And that's the problem. Our lives don't work unless I'm doing the bending. It doesn't. And we both know it. No, please, I can see your mind working and you looking for the perfect words to make this better. And I don't want that. I don't want it. Because you're too good at it. You're unbelievable at it, in fact. And you say the right speech and have the whole world eaten out of your palm. Me especially.
No. No, I don't accept that, Beth. I'm not going along with this revisionist history.
Revisionist history. Okay,
Okay,
I'm
in
trying to.
what universe have I been steamrolling you for the past 20 years? I mean, your whole persona is driven by you being the head of this family. So I'm gonna ask you again, in what ridiculous universe are you this wallflower that's just been steamrolled by me? And these are not my words, Beth. This is your MO. So please, please do not self-protect by putting this on
That is
me.
not what I'm
The
doing.
hell it's not. I refuse to be blamed for the fact that you had your awakening 20 years too late. At any other point in our marriage, if you had decided you wanted to go back to dance, I would have been nothing but supportive.
Oh, so when would I have done that, huh? Between which of your anxiety attacks? I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. I did not mean. Where are you going?
To Philly. So I don't want to be in this house with you right now. It was good news for you, I guess. I'm all out of speeches.
All right. So there's a lot there. You're right there, Adrian.
Yeah, I'll make it. I'll make it.
We're here for your emotional support.
Right.
You'll be
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, we're here to process it. You and all our listeners, right? So, as I mentioned, there's a lot going on there, and in the beginning of the pod, just a few minutes ago, I was talking about how conflicts have these layers of different things, and some of the most common things that come to the surface are areas of hurt, areas of wounding, and areas of misalignment. And there's clearly both of those going on here in this example. And for the next podcast, when we kind of talk through how we deal with hurts and wounds, we'll probably go through the same clip just to kind of unpack what we saw there, because there's plenty, right? There's a lot of hurts and wounds and narratives in that one. But for the sake of this podcast, we're going to focus specifically and solely on the areas in which they are not aligned and how those misalignments drive a conflict, a series of conflicts between the two of them. So, kind of with that framework, I'd like to just get your thoughts on what areas do you see that this couple, Randall and Beth, where they are misaligned and not on the same page, and how it's causing strife and conflict between the two of them. What do you guys see?
I mean, I think the first thing that I notice is like the definition of roles, where they see themselves in the relationship. They obviously have a different view of how the past has gone down and how the relationship has been defined over time. Beth sees it as, I have always been supporting you, and whatever you need, your needs came first. And Randall doesn't see it that way. He appears to see it as it was more of an equal. And I would have supported you anytime. This is, for some reason, this is now a bad time, and in the past it wouldn't have been a bad time. So there's this definition of what are our roles in the marriage, and who is supposed to flex, and how do we flex, and how do we do that.
For me also, it's a goal setting, right? Of clear and defined goals of what wins look like within the relationship, wins, roles, career paths. What do those specifically look like? Because it's pretty clear that they're not aligned on that, and probably from the resentment and genuine frustration from the wife's end, this has been going on for a long time, right? This has been building. This isn't just one situation. It's been years, basically, of her feeling that she's put her needs and her wants on the back burner for him, right? And to your point, Laura, he's not seeing that whatsoever. And he even says so much of that of, please show me the wallflower, right? That, or this person, I don't see this person. So part of it is even the ability to get in line on goals, because obviously, and I'm not a huge, I haven't watched the show. So, but the aspect of now he's a politician and he's won an election, how long, right? How long of that process did it go through? And now he's in a different city and all of that kind of stuff. Where was the conversation prior to any of that decision being made? And now that it's here and it's in everyone's face, now it's a really big deal. And the misalignment is very clear now, right? So part of it, the question for me is, not so much, of course, right now we'll handle it and how we figure it out right now. But in the beginning, when the first decision was made of, hey, I'm going to run for office, at that point, where was the alignment, right? Like where were we aligned at that point? And then we can kind of move forward.
Yeah. And Adrian, you kind of have a unique perspective on this, not knowing what has happened in the show, because this is almost like this couple has come and sat down with you.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
You have no backstory at all.
Yeah. And so what's interesting about that is like, you're right. I mean, there wasn't a lot of alignment in the beginning, and they didn't spend a lot of time. I mean, he basically pushed her and said, hey, this is what we're going to do. And she was like, okay, and so there was a little bit of that going on. But I think when you look at over time, what they haven't done well is be on the same page. And part of it, she mentions the anxiety, is because she was trying to manage that anxiety that he had as being a successful person. And that's one of the reasons why he stepped away from his job. So you have that situation where there were conflicts in the marriage that never got addressed because she was trying to manage his emotions. She was trying to really control the situation by providing a safe space for him, rather than pushing him to be more responsible for his own feelings and emotions and work on his own personal issues. And so that's one of the ways that I think a lot of times, especially in marriages, one partner starts to overfunction for the other partner, and then starts to build up resentment because of the overfunctioning. And that's very typical. You'll see it. It could be either side. It could be the man or the wife that does that, but that is a recipe for codependence and a recipe for resentment. And then all of a sudden, the one who's been dependent, the one who's been leaning in on the other one, was like, well, everything's been great.
I didn't know there was a problem.
Yeah,
Everything seems fine.
You've been supporting me. That was the role you chose. And in a way, there's a lot of truth to that. That is the role that they choose.
Yeah. This is such a common conflict. When dealing in marriage counseling, it is such a common thing to see, and the gender roles are fairly common as well. It's the sense that the wife has lost her identity and lost her sense of meaning and purpose, and it's not a overnight thing. It's a gradual thing that's happened over years and decades, where we've just been kind of postured this way. And so there comes a point in time when the wife and Beth in this video clip is now thinking, okay, I'm not okay with this anymore. I've given my identity away. She says it in the clip, like, we made a promise to one another that we would not lose ourselves in one another, right? That was something said at the very beginning, because she, and to know the backstory, she knew that was going to be a thing. She knew that was going to be a difficult thing to make sure that doesn't ever happen. But she had gradually lost herself little by little, to the point where finally she gets to this point in marriage where she's like, I don't even know who I am. And and I don't know what I want. But when I get finally some breath of fresh air of what I want, now there is a problem because it changes the entire dynamic of to the alignment issue. How do we share power? How do we share dreams? How do we share a focus on whose goals get airtime here, right? Because whereas it might have been okay before, we are now misaligned on this one, right? And yeah, to your point, Laura, the husband is thinking like Randall, the situation like at any point in time, if you had told me like we could have done different, but you never said anything, and so I'm gonna be on the Randall train until I'm told otherwise. But now you're gonna tell me it's gonna shift the entire dynamic, and so it feels unfair to him. But to your point, Laura, it's been gradually going this way for a long time, and hence the reason why she's building resentment, right? Again, such a common thing, and I'm sure our listeners out there, either husbands or wives, are thinking, yeah, that's probably in some way, in some fashion, reflective of what's going on in our lives too, in some way, right? Hey, we hope that you're enjoying this podcast, and we wanted to share something really exciting that we've been working on. If you want to go deeper into the issue of conflict, particularly as it pertains to your marriage, we've created a comprehensive video course for you called Rules of Engagement. You'll get lesson videos, a companion workbook, case studies, and exercises to help you make practical steps to work through conflict in marriage. Watch it now on our website at watershedinitiative.com. Yeah, any other thoughts or anything else that you see as an alignment issue, or anything else that you would just want to observe about the clip?
Well, one thing, and I keep touching it on, as a person who does not have any right backstory of this, right? No context on this, but also a huge moment that was missed, and I see this consistently in therapy, is the ability when she was kind of, for lack of better words, unloading, was for the moment within there for him to say, tell me more, right? Like, help me understand more how I've steamrolled you, right? Like, explain to me how those things have happened. There was a real moment for him to be able to understand that regardless of how he feels about the situation, his wife is being very clear about how she feels about it and how she's felt about it for some time. And for him to have the ability to hold that emotion just for a little bit and to really dive in and understand more of, well, what am I doing that, what am I doing that helps to you feel this way, right? Or to just really understand his wife a little bit more in that moment. A lot of times that specific opportunity gets lost because we either become defensive or frustrated for whatever reason. So that was another thing that I picked out on that happens quite often in session that I noticed.
Yeah. One of the things that I pick up in this, as I'm clearly one of the misalignments that we're observing, is that they're not on the same page about how they share, I guess, prioritization of whose dreams and whose goals are going to take precedence, right? The For the backstory, for those of you who aren't watching the series, and for you, Adrian, the issue at this point is that she has started a career as a dance instructor, right? She has a history and background in dance, and so she is picking up a dream that she left behind a long time ago. And she's very gifted in this area, and she's finding herself again in this way. Um, and and so there's now a conflict of like who's going to get airtime, because they can't do both now, is what they're feeling. They can't manage your dreams and priorities with mine, and so that's an obvious area of misalignment between the two of them that's causing conflict. The reason why they're having this conflict is because their schedule and their priorities have bumped into one another, and so it's literally forced them to choose, well, who's going to get time, right? So that's one area of misalignment that we can observe from this clip. The other one that I observe, we've talked about it in past podcasts, but it's kind of the meta conflict of like how do we talk to one another? How do we communicate with one another in conflict, or in general when it comes to making decisions? And so I think in the very beginning of the clip, you could see Randall flashing back to a conflict that he observed between his mom and dad. And he's like, okay, like, and he says, I will not be bullied into saying something mean, right? Because he saw what that looked like from his family of origin. And so he's thinking, the misalignment here is that you want to go there and I don't. You want to take me there. You want to take our conversation there. You want the fight to go that way, and I don't want to go there. And so there, right there, tells me that they're not there. For Randall, he's identifying, well, we are not on the same page about what's fair. How are we to act and treat one another in a fight? And so that might be one thing to bring up as well. So there's another misalignment there. But then digging a little bit more into it as well, that there's a potential misalignment in terms of how do we advocate for one another. Because again, Randall says later on, if you had stopped and told me at any point in time that you wanted to do this, I would have been more than supportive. And I think what he's saying is that we are not maybe aligned and on the same page about how we advocate for one another. Like, I think I advocate for me and you advocate, but maybe the way we advocate for ourselves is not the same, right? And that might require a meta conflict to talk about, well, how do we speak up for ourselves? How do we do that? Because it's obvious it's gotten us into a pinch. To your point, Adrian, this is already like they're in it now. Like he's on the council board. And so that decision, that conversation should have happened a long time ago, right? And he's saying, when do you have this conversation? At what point do you tell me that this is what you want? Because we're already kind of all in now, right? So that's another area. So there's a few different misalignments that are going on in this clip, just in this 5-minute conflict, right? And so as we kind of talked about in past podcasts, it's really important to be able to know how to identify these things and peel them out and say, okay, which one are we talking about? Which one of these things are the important? And they can all feel important, right? Even as I say them, they're like, man, that's probably one thing that we should talk about. But you can't do all of them at once, right? That's the hard part. And so that's part of the objective of being able to divide it. So
yeah, and when you look at that conversation, and we've talked about exit lanes as well, about where can you pull out of, I mean, I think that point when he said that about bullying was a point that was almost like a signal to her. Hey, this should be an exit point for me, because I can see that he's not hearing what I'm saying. I can see that he's taking it in a defensive manner,
right.
And he's associating that with past hurts that he has.
Yeah.
Because in his history, he's been an outsider. He's always kind of been on the outside of almost every situation. He went to a different school than his brothers and sisters did. He was always outside of like the whole thing. So when that happens and she's like, I'm not going to be bullied, I mean, that's a clue for her. She misses that one and zooms right past it.
But he's triggered already.
Yeah, he's getting heightened. And then she comes back. I mean, he comes back with her and is being very defensive. And then when she pulls that anxiety thing,
that crosses the line for him.
Yeah. And then basically they're at that point, they're all into narratives and about throwing daggers at each other. And that's where harm starts to happen in the relationship.
This is where damage happens.
Yeah.
And narratives get formed, and a lot of time has to be spent on just recovering from how the conversation went. And they get further and further away from the actual underlying issue. Right?
I love to dive even deeper to that of the past narratives that they brought into it. So Laura just touched in on some of the interesting aspects of family origin aspects that he brought in. And then the aspect for her of when she says, you know, we promised we'd never lose ourselves in each other, and you let me. Mm-hmm. That specific aspect of you let me, that's very telling to me as well, right? Of past hurts, whatever it might be, or family of origin issues of if I come into a relationship specifically saying, do not let me lose myself in this relationship, that's pretty telling of a person, right? So for a lot of it, it's past narratives, not only so much just within that have been built up within the relationship, but that they walked into that relationship carrying, and that they're still viewing hurts and triggers through that lens. So part of it is breaking down, okay, not only do we have obviously fundamental misalignments in the relationship, but also there are some genuine things that y'all need to be working on your own personal narratives as well.
Right. Yeah. There's a ton of damage that's built up in the marriage. There's also a ton of family of origin stuff too. And again, I think that we're going to spend the entire next episode of this podcast series to talk about those things. But there's a lot there to dive into about where these hurts are coming from and what their MO is, right? And so Adrian, you'll get all your answers, all your questions answered at that point.
Can't
Right?
wait.
He's like, I didn't want to watch the
show. It's like, regardless, you were going to watch the show. So
life
is telling me that, right?
I hear that a lot. Like, so when I ask me, hey, have you watching this show? And some people are like, I can't watch it. It's just too intense. And some people are like, they're all in it because it is so intense. But there's a lot of there's just a lot of depictions of realness of how relationships are complicated and stuff like that, which is one of the reasons why we're using it for this podcast. So sorry, Adrian, to drag you into this one.
No, don't apologize. I love good acting. This is great. At least it's great acting, right?
Yeah, right. Well, so on this point, like, because we're going to try and segment this into specifically areas of misalignment, we've seen this when it comes to Randall and Beth on the area of work and career and dreams. But let's expand this conversation a little bit more and give me and give our listeners maybe a baseline for thinking about other areas in which people can feel misaligned on that are common. Maybe in an effort to try to help bridge the gap for a lot of our listeners in identifying, hey, that's an area you might be experiencing, but that area that you're experiencing conflict in, that's because of a misalignment. So what are some things that you commonly see are areas of misalignment when it comes to our interpersonal relationships?
Some of the ones I see, the ones I wrote down specifically, are goals for the marriage of, okay, here where do our careers go, right? Like where is our career trajectory in that regard? Also, just genuine marriage goals. How do we talk? How do we align? Meta conflicts, right? How all of those issues, and then the third one that, depending on where you're at in your marriage, parenting. That is a huge one that I see quite often of either we're not aligned on it or one person is going one way and the other person's kind of doing some other things. So those are some of the issues that I see specifically on misalignment, with parenting being an underlined one circle.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Laura? What do you see?
Well, and I agree. Parenting can be a huge area of misalignment because oftentimes this gets back to like I parent the way my parents parented.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how it's the same as like we talked about in previous episodes. I fight the way my parents fought. A lot of times people don't even realize that there's other ways to do things.
Yeah.
This is just the way I do it. And the way you're doing it is wrong because this is the way it's done.
Right.
I see that a lot, especially when you have a more permissive person, a parent, and a more legalistic parent.
Yeah.
And both of them are like, but you're wrong. You're being too hard or you're being too soft. And there's this struggle between where's the balance between these two. And people that are very aligned on a lot of their places can get way misaligned on that because it creates this tension where you have the more permissive parent always defending the children.
Mm-hmm.
And the more legalistic parent always saying, you're not on my side. You're not backing me up.
Yeah.
And that becomes a huge source of conflict within a marriage and causes them to really have to struggle and say, okay, we have to find a balance here. And a lot of times they just don't. That's just a consistent problem over the lifetime of the marriage and causes a lot of damage.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to break that down a little bit more. That actually kind of leads into the next question in terms of what are some of the roadblocks and obstacles in addressing some of these misalignments. And kind of what you're bringing up here, Laura, is that we all come into relationships with somewhat of a pre-programmed idea of the way things are supposed to work, right? Our family of origin or just our past relationships defined for us. This is the way communication works. This is the way money works, or this whatever it is. There is a predefined set within our minds, and if we're not able to have a discussion around that and to even suspend the way that we want to do things, to have a conversation, well, let's talk about the way that we can do things, right? That makes it really difficult to do, but that is definitely a common area of contention and strife, I would say, and I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things I noticed, especially in individual counseling, when you talk to someone, you say, so tell me a little bit about your family growing up. Oh, I had a normal childhood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Normal to you.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, that's a very typical response. You say, okay, so talk to me a little bit more, but what was discipline like? And they'll start to go into it and you're like, that is not normal.
Yeah.
But I don't think there really is a normal when it comes to childhood.
Yep.
Everyone has such a unique experience.
Yeah.
And to just like say, oh, it was normal is really discounting the impact that all of those experiences had on you and how you process information and how you see the world. And really leads to a lot of misalignments because, again, you're speaking a different language with the person you're trying to relate to.
Absolutely. Yeah. Some of the areas that I will see as common conflict points, areas where the boundaries, if they're not on the same page, will cause conflicts. And I think about it in the framework of marriage because that's mostly what I do. But it would be, you mentioned it, Adrienne, how we communicate, how we do conflict. So it's a meta conflict, like we fight different ways. And so that's an area of misalignment. And when that's misaligned, it leads to a lot more conflict. So that's definitely one. Money is a big issue, right? In terms of how we go about spending and budgeting money, saving, all kinds of stuff. And there's differences there. It leads to fights about, what are our financial goals? Because what we do with money is very different. So that's one area. Another one we've mentioned before is dealing with kids, parenting, discipline, expectations, the roles we have as parents. If we're not on the same page in that area, another common area of conflict, right? Another one that probably does not get talked about enough and needs to get talked about is sex, and how what the expectations are, and what are each individual's wants and kind of boundaries around sexual intimacy and physical intimacy and those kinds of things. And then yeah, I think the last one that I typically see is going to be around in-laws, like how we deal with, your parents, my parents, that kind of thing. Those are usually the common culprits when it comes to marriage work. I would imagine that looks a little bit different if you're talking about misalignments between parents and kids or teens, because especially with teens, they're developing their own kind of set of expectations and boundaries and values. And so I'm curious to see what you guys see as a common list as well from that framework.
With parents and teens?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of that it comes from expectations. What, when the kid was 2 or 3 years old or 4 years old, they said, "I want to be a dentist," right?
Right.
And then all of a sudden they don't want to be a dentist, they want to be a rock star, and you're like, "Wait a second, I always thought you'd make a great dentist," And so, and just really the trajectory of what the parents' hopes and dreams are for the kids, aligning with what the kid really wants to do and where they're really bent and what they really want to do, and separating those two, and the parent's level of investment in the performance of their child can really cause a lot of misalignment there. So when you're completely invested, like what my child does is a complete reflection on me as a parent, which is unfortunately we can't make that correlation is so detrimental to so many relationships. When that is the case, that's always going to cause misalignment. You're always going to have an area where you feel so overly invested in your child that when they do anything wrong, it's a complete reflection on you.
Yeah. So if they act or think differently than you, it's harder to tolerate that misalignment because they are a reflection of you.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so it's harder to say, okay, we can agree to disagree, and we can find common wins where we're okay. That's much harder to do when it comes to your kids because of that correlation, as you said. Yeah. No, that totally makes sense. Yeah.
I see that a lot in regards to the identity being tied in to the children, right? Like, so if their grades are not so well, then immediately I must have failed as a parent, right? Like it is the direct reflection of me, or all of a sudden they're not going to church as much. So I am getting looked at as this terrible parent, right? So some of those things of recognizing, kind of explaining to parents. And then the real issue that I run into, it's not just that specific aspect, but it's when one parent says, well, let's give them a little bit more space. And you touched on it perfect, Laura, of the aspect of having kind of a legalistic versus kind of like a little bit more permissive, of the aspect of then there's resentment that starts to get built within the marriage of why aren't you coming around this problem as big as as why aren't you taking this as serious as I am? And then there starts to become kind of a real friction in that way of, well, let's find the healthy way to come around this, because there's a good chance that neither of them are doing it in a healthy way. So let's kind of define what that looks like. Let's find some alignment even on what that looks like. So sometimes it's peeling back the layers of let's find alignment on a lot of different issues, because right now we're not aligned on anything really. So sometimes it's kind of painting the picture of like, well, what does this look like? And as we pull back the layers, we start to find some, especially with parenting, of identity, right? Like my identity is tied into when my child acts out, quote unquote, that's on me, right? And they immediately kind of wear that like it's a coat, as opposed to saying they're children, right? And we have a role as parents and they have a role as children, and kind of nestling out what that looks like.
Yeah, so that leads into the next question, which is going to be what makes it hard? What are the roadblocks to being able to get alignment? And that kind of what you just said brought to my mind, like one of the common things that makes having this conversation really hard is it's so tied into, it's so ingrained with past hurts. Because in my mind, having a discussion of like, well, like what do we think about money? What do we think about boundaries with in-laws or parenting or dreams and whose goals are going to take priority? These are all ideal conversations. Like we want to have these conversations ideally in advance, like so we can kind of goal set and go forward. But when there are conflicts, they typically mean these conversations come because there have been a series of decisions that have violated these alignments, right? And so to even have the discussion, the thing I run into all the time with couples is, hey, what do we want to do for how we fight with one another? What are the alignment issues that we want to say? These are the rules for how we fight, or how we handle money, or how we parent. Inevitably, the conversation is going to gear towards going from, okay, what is it that we ideally want, to, well, that's not what he's done, right? Or that's not what she's done. She's been doing this and this and this. And it becomes a whole list of ways in which those boundaries have been violated over years. And that's what moves the conversation so quickly and so charged into an area of hurt, which is, again, why we're separating out conversations that are about alignments. Because alignments, the way I describe it to my clients, is alignments are about getting on the same page going forward in the future, right? Hurt conversations and talking through past hurts are about the past, right? And you can't do both at the same time, right? And so it's literally like, let's choose to isolate the conversation to, okay, what are our ideals going forward, and understand that we have a lot of reconciliation to do about the past, right? So I see that as a common roadblock, and why couples and get tripped up in that area. I'm curious to see what other areas that you guys might see are roadblocks as well, for you to be able to get either a parent and a teen, or a couple, or whoever, to a place where they can get alignment. What are some of the things that kind of like get in the way for you guys?
I mean, I think self-ownership is often what gets in the way. Being willing to step back and say, "Hey, this is my role in this misalignment." And you kind of saw it in the situation with Beth and Randall, and because he didn't really take any ownership for that. He was stamping back and say, "Well, you should have said, you should have spoke up." And it's a matter of saying, okay, what was my role in this situation? What is my role in this misalignment? And how did I maybe miss something? I mean, if I step back from this and say, when we get to this point that we're having this argument, where is my responsibility?
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say in that one is that initially the response that we saw with Randall is defensiveness. Like, this misalignment and the pain that's come out of that, I'm feeling attacked and made responsible for that. And so his initial response is defensive, like, no, that's not my fault. But if he could shift that to, okay, the point is, right now she's trying to communicate to me. Can I take ownership of the fact that, for whatever reason, I had not heard that before? Can I hear it now? Can I hear what she's trying to say now, so that we can get on the same page? So if we can get over that defensiveness, that opens up the lane a little bit better, right?
Yeah. And I think, I mean, it comes back to resilience that we've talked about before, where like being able to like suspend your need to be right and listen to what's going on. And a lot of times that's the biggest roadblock, is like, you have to defend, you have to fight. And I want you, okay, so that's what you think? Well, this is what I think, kind of thing. And that back and forth can really be a huge roadblock when you're not able to like pull back from that.
That's a great point. Yeah.
I think a lot of it, what Laura touched in on, is self-awareness, the ability to look at the role that you played within the situation, but also of what kind of defining what alignment looks like. I think sometimes with alignment, people think that we have to be 100% have that view. I like how you put it, like, what is the view of the future, right? We want to be aligned on what it looks like moving forward, and understanding that we may not 100% be exactly on every single minute detail of what that looks like, but that we can come to a conclusion and an agreement, and both of us can feel heard, both of us can feel understood. There's not any resentment that goes on there, and that we can align in that way. It may not be that you see the world exactly the way I see it, and that I see it the exact way that you see it, but that we can still compromise and still align in that way. And there doesn't have to be hurts and resentments that go along with that compromise. And that's, to the flip side, that's not what we saw in the video, right? There was one person who truly felt that I've made too many compromises, right? I've consistently compromised over and over. And I see that a lot of one person that's like, and I'm done. I've done enough compromising. I'm no longer at a point to where I will continue to compromise. It's this person's time now. And so there are those moments of, okay, let's kind of pull back. And you touched in on it, of past hurts versus alignment and what that looks like, and kind of pointing it out to them of, these are the two things that we're struggling with right now. And just want to make you aware of what this looks like, right? And then at that point, usually we start to have a little bit more movement when people can kind of take ownership of, okay, this is my role that I'm playing.
Yeah. And I like how you said, like, it's not like there's not necessarily one way to do it. I mean, could be more than one way to do it, because like I think about when in parenting, like sometimes when you're talking about the permissive and the legalistic parent, that can create a good balance. Like, let's let you take the lead on this one. Let's like you take the lead in more of a permissive stance on this situation, and let's see what kind of reaction we get from this kid.
Right.
And then, and we've done it in our marriage where I'm like, I've tried all of my strategies,
Yeah.
and now I want you to try your strategies. So handing some issues from one parent to the next can be a real good strategy.
Cop, bad cop.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, so, I've gone in and I've tried to listen and tried to, do those things, which is more my stance. And then my husband is a little bit more of the legalistic when it comes to that. And saying, hey, I want you to take the lead with this child for a while because I've been trying and I've been working and my strategies haven't been working. So understanding that just because you're not on the same page doesn't mean there's not value on both pages.
Yeah. Just to be able to get enough commonality of what the overall goal is. So if the overall goal is that we want to be able to parent our child well, we might go about it in different ways. Can we value each other's different methods and leverage off of one another's strengths and gifts and be able to still align on the primary goal, right? A lot of that requires getting to what that higher goal is, right? Because if we get into the weeds of like, no, it's got to be my way and the way I'm doing it is better, to, okay, well, if better just simply means we want to be able to parent well together and we want to raise our kid well together, then that shifts the focal point a little bit. It allows you to be a little bit more pliable and movable in other areas, right?
It also opens up the toolbox a lot more because you're almost like strategic planning with your spouse on, okay, so these are all the tools we have available to us. We have more permissive tools, we have more legalistic tools. What's going to work best with this child? Because not everything works with every child.
Right. Yeah. This moves me into maybe the next question on this topic, which is, okay, what are the things that you guys do to help get either parents and teens on the same page or a couple aligned? Like, what are some of the ways that you would walk through and your clients on doing this, knowing that there's these obstacles in play, like knowing that like for me, if I have a couple coming in, I'm like, okay, you guys are not on the same page about how you fight, about how you communicate, or how you have boundaries with so and so. At that point, sometimes they're so exhausted, to your point, Adrian, like they're kind of done. It's because they have so much hurt involved, right? And at that point, I have to structure it in a certain way and say, okay, well, these are the things that we have to work through to get you back on the same page, accounting for those different obstacles. So for our listeners here, how do you walk through any of these different types of situations to get people a little bit closer to being aligned, but also observing that those obstacles are real as well, right?
For me, a lot of times it's letting them vent everything out, right? And getting a good grasp of what all the conflicts are, what all the narratives are, individual and within the relationship. And then all of a sudden at that point, I redefine goals. I have them redefine the goals and specifically state out what they are. Because at that point, then we're able to actually visualize what those goals are and verbalize them. There's a lot of assuming that goes on at times. And those assumptions turn into big hurts and basically fights at that point. So really, we get to a point of, what are the clear goals? So if it's the fights are about parenting, okay, well then what does that look like? What are our roles? What's the husband's role in parenting? What's the wife's role in parenting? And specifically to that relationship, not what society tells you it is, specifically to you. And as we break that down, even in the marital situation, what are the marital goals? From sex, money, everything, all the way down, some of those issues. At that point, we can start to become, and I don't say it in the way of, okay, we're going to get aligned on these issues. What I do is I break it down and we write everything down. And then at that point, they start to align on their own, right? They start to ask a little bit deeper questions of, well, what does that look like? Well, I have a problem when you do this. And then we start to pull back a little bit more of, okay, why, right? Like, why is that a problem? Why are you so frustrated when that happens? And that can kind of dive in a little bit on the individual trigger side. So really what it is pulling back all the way of what alignment looks like on these big ticket issues, basically. And recognizing a lot of times they never had alignment on those, ever. There was never an agreement. Or maybe there was an agreement prior to marriage, but then once it changes, prior to marriage, prior to kids, all of that stuff changes.
Continuing conversation.
Exactly. It all changes. So it's kind of redefining maybe the goal that person had was still the pre-marriage goal. And now they're 10 years into it and they're still operating on that. And the other person has grown and now they're 10 years down the road. So sometimes it's kind of painting the picture once again of what does it look like for both of you. And then we can align from there.
Observation.
Yeah. I mean, the goals are so important because when you have the same goals and you have the same vision, and then you realize you're on the same team, that makes such a huge difference, because a lot of times when I talk to clients about, hey, you guys are on the same team, it's almost like well, not really. I mean, I really want to be right more than I want to be on the same team. And so trying to make that posture switch from I'm defending my position to we're trying to come to agreement, and we're trying to build a team, and we're trying to build a partnership rather than trying to like defend my position. That's a huge shift. And when you start to make that shift, and when couples start to move towards we're partnering, we're on a team, we're trying for the same goals, we have the same outlook and end game in mind, that really changes where they end up.
Yeah, yeah. The shift in mentality, getting instead of it being a win lose scenario, being a prototypical win win. It takes a lot of creativity, and it takes a lot of commitment to find that out. And really, what I observe for a lot of couples is that they spend so much of their mental and emotional energy on trying to win, instead of thinking, hey, there are multiple ways to be able to do this where we can both walk away feeling we've been heard and respected. It just takes conscientious effort to do that.
Yeah, and the win-win is not for you and me to have a win. The win-win is that the relationship wins. And that's the biggest shift, I think, is like our priority shouldn't be ourselves. Our priority should be the relationship. And even with kids, like when you're in a situation with kids, and especially teenagers, like trying to put that relationship priority is huge, because a lot of times you get caught up in the behavior.
Right, the grades or the performance or those kinds of things. That's a great point. I think if you can make a mental shift to like what's really important here is the relationship, then that means that you're willing to suspend or even sacrifice certain things that you think are wins for yourself for the sake of the relationship. And if you don't have that posture, a lot of times what happens is that you might get the things that you want, but you don't get the relationship.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so often, I mean, especially with teens, you would rather them fail in sixth, seventh, eighth grade than to be failing in college.
Right. And to not have a relationship with them. Right.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing as a parent, thinking about like, they might not be doing the things that I think are best or wisest, but at the end of the day, I want them to always know that they can come and talk to me, right? And if I don't have a relationship with them, they're not going to. And they're going to be talking to anyone else out there, and you have no mechanism anymore to be an influence in their life, right? That's a huge, a posture shift is a good way to put it. To be focusing on, hey, the real win here is the relationship. I like that.
One thing I was going to dive into specifically of alignment of, and once again, the sports analogy of when we align in the beginning, especially when I've been on teams previously, it's not that we didn't have conflicts or frustration or fights. We totally had those things. But in the beginning, we were aligned on what a win looked like very clearly of either we were going to score the most points or we were going to do whatever. But it was very clear, and we were all on the same page of that. So even when the fights happened and the frustrations happened and all of that, it was okay because we were able to work through it because we still had the same goal. And the reason that the frustrations were happening were because we were saying, if you continue to do things in this manner, we're not going to get to the goal of alignment that we had already set up as a team. Right? So it's no longer about your individual wins. It's about our team wins. And there are some people who can be team players, and there's some that can't really understand that. And it's that ability to kind of parcel it out of saying, hey, well, what's the end game, right? Like, what's the win look like for your marriage? Because to Laura's point, if it just looks like me being right, then that's all we're going to get out of this relationship. But if the goal is, hey, we want to have a healthy relationship, we want our kids to have a loving, nurturing environment, we want these things, and that's the goal, and it's understood on both people, then it's pretty clear, right? Like we got to hit this line.
Yeah, I love that analogy, because I mean, from as a sports fan, you hear it all the time. Like in the locker room, they're talking about, hey, is this about your stats? Like, is this about the team win? Right? Are you how many targets did you get, or what was how many times did you get the ball? Those kinds of things deteriorate the morale within the team, right? If it's like, hey, we know someone in here is just really about themselves, and I think that creates the adversarial posture, right? But if they know, hey, we're here for one another, and we will support one another, and when one of us fails, we all fail. When we win together, we all win, right? That's a great analogy. I love that. The thing that I want to go back to what you were saying before of how the the conversation just needs to be had so often throughout the time. I think like there's so many things that shift the circumstances for us, like from marriage to kids and so forth. So I think we talked about this in episodes past about having proactive conversations, proactive conflict, proactive times to say, hey, where are we at with these things, right? Before they come around and bite us in the butt, where are we at with our budget? Where are we at with where our kids are at? Where are we at with how the boundaries with taking care of aging parents? Like that becomes an entirely different question as well, right? These are all things that we thought we had a certain set of circumstances at one stage of life, but those all change later on, and we need to be able to revisit this and have this alignment conversation again, right? That I think is a great point to be able to kind of say, hey, how do we get past some of these roadblocks? The only thing I'll add to this one is I think that it's helpful to be able to define what that dream is, what the highest value or the principle is, whether it's like I want to be able to care well for my aging parents, or I want to be able to raise a kid that is, this X, Y, and Z. What is the highest value that you can ascribe to and be able to communicate that with your partner or whoever it is that you're talking to, and see if they can tell you as well, right? What is the ultimate win for you, as you're saying? And can we figure out a way creatively to respect those together and create some type of way, a strategy to be able to respect those together? And then once you do that, to be able to solidify it and say, yes, we agree and we commit to that. But once you make that commitment, your actions going forward have to reflect that. And that's probably where I see a lot of times couples get mixed up, is that we in theory agree, but when it comes down to it in actual execution, we are not doing it, right? And that becomes an issue to kind of go back and say, okay, how are we doing with this alignment issue, right? Yeah. Any other thoughts that you guys would have about just being able to guide your clients or people into this process?
One last thing I would say is to be a good teammate. Sometimes things don't get said because either you don't want to hurt someone's feelings or you don't want to talk about it, right? But if the goal was set of alignment and you're noticing that person is straying, right, and kind of doing their own thing, we've got to be a good teammate too, and kind of bring that to the forefront, right? Yeah, and kind of touch into that and say, hey, we did have this alignment and we had this goal. It kind of feels like we're drifting a little bit. Can you help me out with that, or what are you seeing? Yeah. So part of it is that, and that's a tough conversation. It's tough to be the person that holds other people accountable, but if we have a common goal and we've already stated it, someone has to be that person, right?
Yeah. Many times I've had that conversation in proactive conflicts with my wife when we sit on the weekends to talk, and a lot of the question is like, hey, we had this kind of goal in mind. We wanted to be here in X number of years, but some of the decisions that we make and some of the actions we take don't reflect us making those maneuvers. And so it can be a contentious conversation, but again, if you go into this thinking, these agreements were there for the sake of the relationship, the accountability conversation becomes a lot easier because it's a mutual agreed upon and desired thing, and it's just like we need to have open, honest conversations about that, right? Yeah, I like that. That's a great point. Okay, let's go ahead and wrap it up here, guys. Thank you very much for unpacking this particular area of conflict, alignments, and there's a lot there. And as we've kind of noted, there's a lot more in the area of hurts, and we're going to unpack that in the next episode. So next episode, Adrian, we're going to dig right back into this episode of This Is Us. And
let's do it.
All right.
Can't wait.
Okay.
Your favorite show.
That's right. You're going to go home and watch all the episodes and binge it before our next episode.
Probably not, but that's fine.
Okay. All right. That's cool. That's all right. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and catch us on the next episode. Thank you very much.
Have a great day, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. Now, if you benefited from this podcast, be sure to subscribe, like, share with your friends, and make sure to leave us a review on iTunes. It really does help us to keep making podcasts and more content like this possible for you. If you have any questions, want to get more content, or just want to stay connected with us, go to our website at watershedinitiative.com and follow us on social media. Lastly, if you want to get connected with a life coach or therapist, call us at our collaborative group practice, Lifeology in Richardson and Frisco, Texas at 214-556-0996.